Hi, everybody. Welcome to Church History. Actually, it's Heroes and Heretics, Part 34. And I'm excited about our lesson for today. Let me turn off our theme song. I don't know if it's our theme song, but I think I've used it before sometime. But it's for free. I can use it. Anyway, hey, I told you, I don't know if it was last time, the time before, that you've met Honey, our basset hound, who is growing big. I don't know if you've ever met Sonny. And I have Sonny right here. Come here, Sonny. Here we go. Oh, Sonny's going, what in the world's going on here? This is Sonny, our cute little 11, 12-year-old dog. We're not even sure how old Honey is, but she is Sonny. Gosh, I get them all confused. Anyway, say hi to everyone. Now I'm going to lay you down, so I hope you fall back asleep here. Okay? You lay down. Atta boy. Good boy. So let's see what's going on here, because I just got ding-donged, and who's going to... Okay, yes, thank you very much. All right, so again, hello, friends. And as always, it's wonderful to be with you all, although I wish we were in a classroom setting where I could see and interact with you all through questions, answers, and the fair exchange of intellectual, historical, and spiritual ideas. But a YouTube teaching is better than nothing, as they say. And so I'm just glad that you're here. Of course, as I say just about every week, I wish I knew who was watching. I see people are watching it, but I have no idea. So if you could simply go to the comments page, even if you just listen to 1 minute of it, you don't have to give me an evaluation of it. If you could just go to the comments section below and type a simple message such as Randy Evans from Clearwater, Florida. Well, now don't type that, because that would be an obviously dumb joke. If you did, just simply type your name, first and last, or just whatever, and where you're watching this from. That might make all this a little more personal, at least, to me. And even to you, if you saw where other folks were watching from. So I'd appreciate if you would, you would do that. And of course, as always, I ask you, but I don't see it happen very often, if you would like this or subscribe to it or share it with someone that you think might be interested in these sort of things. It kind of helps the algorithm, but I'm not in here for the money. There's no money to be made here. And I'm not in it to get how many views I get. I'm just trying to help out, here. So anyway, I'll do what I, need to do here. You do whatever you want to do, but I'm just glad to be here teaching and that some of you are watching. Of course, I want you folks to learn, but if no one was watching, it would still be a great learning experience for me, because although I love church history and I know a good amount about church history, I am learning boatloads of cool stuff about the history of the church as I prepare each lesson. And that is really true today, because I've always been fascinated with the Crusades. And I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that a lot of you are unfamiliar with the Crusades. You just heard bad things, about that. So I want to be right up front with you and tell you that I have a bunch of books on the Crusades. This is one on the First Crusade, and this one is on crusading in general. And oh boy, I got a whole bunch of other ones here. This one is specifically on the Fourth Crusade. Oh, I'm making a mess with all my albums. On the Fourth Crusade. And again, I have 100 church history books. I've read a bunch of things online and articles and things that people have written about the Crusades. And so I'll be right up front that I won't be able to quote everyone and say, this is from so-and-so, this is from so-and-so, this is from so-and-so. So I've cut and pasted a lot of different ideas and put it in my own words, and sometimes use their own words, so please don't sue me for plagiarism. I'll mention a couple names, here, but I just want to get the information out to you. So I hope that's, will be helpful for you. And I know you came here, to hear church history and not to see this handsome face or be enchanted by my British, Swedish, New Jersey, Floridian charm, which I naturally exude, he said humbly, but rather you have tuned in here to learn a bit more about the history of the Christian church. And so that's what we're going to do here. We talk about the heroes, along with the victories and God glorifying advancements of the gospel, but we're not ignoring the blunders and fleshy sins and mistakes that have been unfortunately made in the name of Christ. Now remember, any heresies or sins or atrocity committed in the name of Christ are never endorsed or blessed by the Lord God, but rather are the results of the fallen sinful nature of those who may call themselves Christians but are not, or even by redeemed Christians who at times may walk in the flesh rather than in the spirit. Any of you out there who are believers walk in the flesh and sin? I got both hands waving here. I have sinned and fallen short, believe me. But the church has been accused by its critics and skeptics of being a violent, greedy, self-righteous, and unkindly, judgmental group of people who in earlier times were thought of as just wanting to take over the world. But actually, I just described a good number, not all, but a good number historically, of adherents of the Islamic faith. Listen to any atheist or enemy of the Christian church, and they will throw at you at least 4 main historical sins of the church. And this is their evidence why it's all malarkey, or that we're just selfish, violent, people. And those 4 historical sins of the church that I thought of are the Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition, slavery, and the church's view of sexual issues. Now, although we can find sin, selfishness, greed, and immorality in any designated group of people, whether they be a religion, a political party, hey, a church, a social group, a gender, a business, sport, or a Girl Scout troop, you can't castigate and cancel an entire group for the sins of particular members of that group. For any of the crimes committed in the name of Christ throughout history, those crimes would never, ever, ever be endorsed or encouraged or perpetrated by the founder of our faith, Jesus Christ. If any crimes have been committed in the name of Christ, and they have been committed by sinners falsely using the name of Christ, or by misguided and carnal believers, and they should have been or will be dealt justly by the judge of all the earth, who always does right. But again, you can't negate the strength, the good, the truth, the peace that comes from the Christian faith just because a number, even if it's a large number, of bad eggs in the carton. Poor decisions or evil deeds done dirt cheap within the church only remind us of how much we need a Savior. But I'll also add, as you're going to see with today's topic, even with the occasional atrocities done in the name of Christ, you will hopefully find, like today, that in this lesson, that they were not as awful as has been presented by the world. Evil in many ways, yes, but all is not what you've been told. And that is especially true with the topic from church history that we're going to look at today. In this session, we're going to study and examine, briefly go over the Christian Crusades of the 11th, 12th, and 13th century, warts and all. And again, let me say right up front, I've got my information from all sorts of sources, so forgive me if I'm not able to quote every one of them. I'm not selling this, so I'm not making any money on any misquotes or quotes, not misquotes, but quotes that I don't give credit for, because I just had so much information. Now, you may remember, I hope, from one of my previous studies, specifically the lesson on the 11th century, that in 1054 AD, the Roman Catholic Church of the West, stationed, of course, in Rome, split in two, with the Catholics remaining in Rome and the Eastern Orthodox Church centered in the East in Constantinople, with each going their separate way. They split up, and it wasn't pretty. In that lesson, I spoke about the reasons of the gray East-West schism, but we're not going to look at that today. Suffice it to say, it was a nastier breakup than when my high school girlfriend of 2 years told me to hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back no more, no more, no more. Okay, who sang that song? Who made that a hit? There's a reason. You can tell me your name, where you're from, and name that artist, even if you don't know the artist. Anyway, even though the breakup was bad, and I'm talking about the East-West schism of 1054, not my high school experience, it would never be fully mended. There was still, even though that was the case, there was still a reverent respect between the brotherhood, and this became evident in 1095, 41 years after the split, when Alexis, the patriarch of the Eastern Church, sent a letter to Urban II, Pope of the Western Church, asking for the Western Church's help in a very serious matter. Alexis, and I can say that name loudly because I'm far away from my echo out in the kitchen there, so Alexis is going, what do you want? What do you want? Alexis was asking the Pope and the Western Church to help their Eastern brothers in a matter that not only affected the Eastern Church, but was and would continually negatively impact the Western Church as well. You see, in the 7th century, around 614 AD, Jerusalem was invaded by the Persians, and 90,000 Christians and Jews were massacred. Just 23 years later, in 636, 637 AD, the Muslims besieged Jerusalem, preventing anyone from leaving or entering in order to force the city and its leaders to surrender. And this is exactly the same thing that we saw happen in 70 AD when Rome attacked Jerusalem with their emperor or their leader Titus, not the Bible Titus, but another Titus, where they destroyed the city, ending all the ceremonial aspects of Judaism. They had a siege on the city, not letting anyone in or out, kind of starving them, out of there. So anyway, back in 636, the Muslim army, led by men whose names I'm not even going to try to pronounce, laid siege of Jerusalem for 6 months. And finally, Patriarch Sophronius agreed to surrender. The Muslim conquest of the city solidified Arab control over the area and was just another piece in the Middle Eastern and European pie that Islam was determined to conquer by force. Now, this letter from the Patriarch to the Pope was a cry for help. So before we go any further, please remember that the Christians didn't attack the Muslims in an unprovoked manner. That's going to be myth 1 that we're going to get to, but I'm going to mention it to you right now. They did not provoke, they did not attack, a sneak attack on the Muslims in an unprovoked manner. They were taking back what was rightfully theirs and the Jews, Jerusalem, the Holy Land. And the only reason the Muslims wanted Jerusalem is because Muhammad said that he had a vision while he was there or was taken up, whatever. But it doesn't have as much historical, spiritual significance as it did as the Jews and the Christians. But anyway, so we were taking back, or I say we, the Crusaders, the Christians were taking back what was rightfully theirs, the Christians and the Jews, and what was viciously taken from them previously. And related to that, Christianity spread through the sharing of the gospel and bringing positive change to people groups. On the other hand, Islam grew by violently attacking nations and forcing conversions. Maybe they let the Christians live in the community if they didn't convert, but at least they took over all the land and all the religious buildings and whatnot. And so, and here's interesting, and I'll bring this up again later. Christians never forcibly went to Mecca or Medina, the two great cities of Islam, and attacked them to forcibly and violently convert the Muslims to Christianity. Now, again, I'll say more about that later. Now, some of you may not remember this, but former President Bill Clinton, in a speech he gave in 2001, shortly after 9/11 at Georgetown University, he made some very wrong, misleading, misinformed comments about the Islamic terrorists who attacked us in New York City, in the Pentagon, and in Pennsylvania. President Obama did a similar thing when he became president. Now, in regards to the terrorist attacks against us, this, they said, was this what Clinton and Obama basically agreed together. They said this was a continuation of their holy war against us as a Christian nation because of what the Crusaders did back in the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries. President Obama, during his ongoing worldwide apologizing tour, if you remember that, apologized to numerous countries and groups of people for all of the wrongdoings we Americans have done to them in the past. And not just Americans, but Christians specifically. And I believe it was Clinton who said specifically that the Christians in the First Crusade went in and slaughtered everyone who was Muslim, women, men and children, and that they walked up to the Temple Mount or whatever, and blood was running up to their hips, something like that. That's just impossible to happen in the first place. But that they slaughtered everyone and took over Jerusalem. Although he never mentioned, nobody ever does, that the Muslims ransacked and took Jerusalem away from the Persians and then the Jews and Christians, whose land and city it belonged to. And so 9/11 was payback for what we as Christians did in the past. He basically said the terrorists did a bad thing to us, but we did a much more evil thing to them first. Baloney. Fake news has been going on for centuries, as you see. One history book, a secular one, said that the Crusades fused together three medieval impulses: piety, pugnacity, which means aggression, and greed. They were all essential to make it a terrorist war with each crusade. That's lies. Another said the Christian arrived unannounced and slaughtered everyone. It was an early form of imperialism. They were there to take land, get booty, get rich, and kill the enemies of the church. Once again, lies. Here's another quote from a secular. Actually, this is from a Christian, a misinformed Christian. Crusades were nothing more than a long act of intolerance in the name of God, which is a sin against the Holy Spirit. See, a Christian, but he's influenced by secular arguments, which you'll see when we get to myth number 4. And it's still a lie. Also, Voltaire. I love this story. Voltaire is the 18th century French Enlightenment writer and philosopher and devout atheist. He said this regarding the Crusades in his famous book, In Praise of Reason. For a long time, we languished in this horrible and degrading barbarism from which the Crusaders did not deliver us. It was at once the most universal, the most atrocious, the most ridiculous, and the most miserable of follies. Again, baloney. Now, of course, the Lord God got the last laugh, so to speak, with Voltaire. I don't know if you've heard this story, but it's absolutely true. Voltaire once held up with my Bible. Right here. Oops. Don't do that to your record player. Voltaire once held up a Bible and said, 100 years from my day, there will not be a Bible in earth except one that is looked upon by antiquarian curiosity seeker. However, the Lord always has other plans. 100 years after Voltaire's death, the Geneva Bible Society used Voltaire's home and press to print and store Bibles. In fact, the printing presses that Voltaire used for his anti-religious pamphlets were used to print Bibles. Anyway, so all of the mess of the Crusades is on the Christians. So whatever we are getting now is our punishment, with terrorism around the world coming from, the extremists, if you want to say that, the extremists. It's our punishment. We had it coming. As a matter of fact, some years ago, there was the 900th anniversary of the Crusaders' sacking of Jerusalem. The New York Times, yeah, we all trust and respect them, compared the Crusades to the work of or the atrocities of Hitler. Oh boy, we've been hearing a lot about Hitler lately, haven't we? Here's another lie. In the same year, there was a pilgrimage of Protestant believers in Western Europe, and everyone had a shirt on them that said, "We're sorry," in Arabic. Now, crusade means cross. It was used to be what Billy Graham had, evangelistic crusades. But they don't use that term much anymore. Even the fabulous Christian college organization, Campus Crusade for Christ, changed their name to Cru, C-R-U, beginning of crusade, Cru, because the word crusade is filled with negativity. So in this lesson, I hope to dispel some of the myths surrounding the Crusades. Now, first, I'm going to share with you a summary of each of the main crusades that ensued over a 3-century period. And these will be brief summaries, some briefer than others, some a little more than others, but trust me, we can't go into details. You're going to have to check on this yourself. Now, the first crusade in 1096 lasted for 3 years, 1099. The first crusade, again, was initiated by the 1095 letter by the Patriarch Alexis of the Orthodox Church to Pope Urban II of the Western Catholic Church. Now, this letter was asking the Pope and the Western Church to aid the Byzantine Empire against the Muslims, who had not only taken over the Holy Land, but destroyed and desecrated many sacred areas and killed many Jews and Christians. After receiving the letter, Pope Urban then preached a powerful sermon that challenged people to go and take back the Holy Land for the Christians and Jews, and the people responded wholeheartedly. This crusade has been considered the most successful crusade, which led to the recapturing of Jerusalem and establishment of Crusader states in the Holy Land. Now, let me explain to you what a Crusader state is, to the best of my understanding. I don't grasp it completely here. Within this region, where's my little diagram? Okay, I got my high-tech diagram here for you. Within this region called the Levant, Levant, which is a historical geographical term referring to a large area of the eastern Mediterranean region of West Asia, the core territory of the political term Middle East, aka the Holy Land. Now, this is that area here that we're talking about. Down here is where Egypt is. Here's where Israel and the other countries are, okay? So, Crusader states were 4 independent geographic areas which ultimately fell under the auspices of the Catholic Church. And it was thought to make it easier for each state to protect itself if more invasions came forth. But again, I admit I don't understand this decision very well. Anyway, the 4 states were the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Tripoli, the, what's that called? The Principality, there it is, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Edessa, okay? Now, these 4 form the Levant as a result of the First Crusade between 1098 and 1109. That's how long it lasted. So the First Crusade accomplished what it set out to do, to give Jerusalem and the surrounding areas back to the Jews and Christians. Second Crusade was 50 years later. That's 1147 to 1149. This was an attempt to recapture Edessa, a Christian city area lost to the Muslims in 1144. Edessa was the first Crusader state and the first state to fall. Now, the Second Crusade was announced by Pope Eugene III and was the first of the Crusades to be led by European kings, namely Louis VII of France and Conrad III of Germany, with the help of a number of other European nobles. Now, Louis and Conrad and the remnants of their armies reached Jerusalem in 1148 and participated in an ill-advised attack on Damascus, which ended in their retreat. In the end, the crusade in the East was a failure for the Crusaders and a victory for the Muslims. It would ultimately have a key influence on the fall of Jerusalem in 1187 and give rise to the Third Crusade at the end of the 12th century. Now, while the Second Crusade failed to achieve its goal in the Holy Land, Crusaders did see victories elsewhere, and the most significant one was over in Portugal. What happened was the combined force of 13,000 Flemish, Frisian, Norman, English, Scottish, and German Crusaders in 1147. They were traveling by ship from England to the Holy Land, and the army stopped and helped a small Portuguese army. I think I said Portugal earlier, but Portugal army of 7,000 soldiers, and in the capture of the city, which is and the capital of Portugal, Lisbon, which had been violently overtaken by the Muslims. Now, these crusaders expelled its Muslim occupants. So even with this important victory for Portugal, ultimately the Second Crusade was a failure. Third Crusade, 40 years later, 1189 to 1192. This crusade was launched in response to Saladin's brutal conquest of Jerusalem in 1187. Now, Saladin, if I'm saying his name right, was the first sultan of both Egypt and Syria. Saladin was determined to destroy the Christians and capture almost every Crusader city, which he did, capture almost every Crusader city. This Third Crusade is notable for the participation of Richard the Lionheart of England, who negotiated a truce allowing Christian access to Jerusalem. So, because the Christians weren't allowed to have pilgrimage to, the Holy Lands. So he did negotiate a truce for that. So it was a very partial victory for the Crusaders, since they received a part of Jerusalem. The Fourth Crusade was 10 years later, 1202 to 1204. And again, the Fourth Crusade. Instead of attacking Muslim-controlled Egypt, the Crusaders sacked the Christian city of Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, due to political maneuverings with Venice. I won't go into it right now, but when the Crusaders arrived in Venice and still had a ways to go, they needed to use their ships or get transport or whatever, and they said, we're not going to transport you unless you help us here deal with this political issue we're having with the Byzantine, city of Constantinople. And some of these Crusaders did. I mean, it's a complicated political issue, but fighting against brothers of the faith is not a good scene for Christianity. Failure. I got a whole book on that. The Fifth Crusade, 13 years later, 1217 to 1221. This was an attempt to recapture Jerusalem by attacking Egypt, but ended in failure and a negotiated truce with the Muslims. The Sixth Crusade, 7 years later, 1228 to 1229. This was led by Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, who secured a treaty with the Muslim leader to gain control of Jerusalem through diplomacy rather than military conquest. But once again, we're just asking them for permission to go to our own city. When I say our, you know what I mean, the Christian Jewish city of Jerusalem. The Seventh Crusade, 20 years later, 1248 to 1254. This was led by King Louis IX of France, and it resulted in a disastrous campaign in Egypt where Louis was captured, but later released. The Eighth Crusade and this is the final crusade, 16 years later in 1270. This was another campaign by Louis IX, this time against Tunis, Tunis, in North Africa, but it ended tragically with Louis's death from disease. Now, again, I didn't say this earlier, but there were eight major crusades. There were other crusades, and those were basically church or state endorsed. But there were many other minor, smaller crusades. There was even a children's crusade. Man, that's a whole story for another day. That was a sick, crazy, thing there. But all of those were not endorsed by the church or by the state. They were just people who said, we'll get back our land. And they were all failures as well. So that's a very brief summary of the 8 major crusades. And you can read all about them if you choose to do so. But my main concern is not only to share that little bit with you, but to help you understand the myths and the misconceptions regarding the Crusades, in which Presidents Clinton and Obama and many others have propagated over the years. So if anything, when you're in a conversation with someone and they say, yeah, what about the wicked Crusades? That's why we have the Muslims are so angry with us. You'll be able not to go into great detail, but you can say to them, you know what, my friend, you don't know nothing. You know diddly. It's not that way. So anyway, I have 4 misconceptions, myths or misconceptions. Number 1, and I've already talked about this previously. Myth or misconception number 1 is that the Crusades were unprovoked attacks by Christians against the peace-loving and innocent Muslims. From the examples and comments that I made at the beginning of this session, the verdict seems unanimous. From presidential speeches to movies and role-playing games, the Crusades are depicted as deplorably violent episode in the history of the church, in which thuggish Western Christians trundle off unprovoked to murder and pillage and rape peace-loving, sophisticated Muslims, laying down patterns of outrageous oppression that would be repeated throughout the subsequent history. In many corners of the Western world today, this view is too commonplace and apparently obvious even to the challenged. They're not going to believe you, but this is the truth. But agreement by many is not a guarantee of accuracy. Sometimes the majority only means that all the fools are on the same side. What everyone knows about the Crusades may not in fact be true. The view that Crusades were unprovoked attacks by the Christians is believed by many, but nothing could be further from the truth. Even a brief overview, a cursory chronological review makes that clear. In AD 632, Egypt, Palestine, Syria, Asia Minor, North Africa, Spain, France, Italy, and the islands of Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica were all Christian territories. Inside the boundaries of the Roman Empire, which was still fully functional in the Eastern Mediterranean, Orthodox Christianity was the official and overwhelmingly majority religion. Outside those boundaries were other large Christian communities. Most of the Christian population of Persia, for example, was Christian but had a slightly heretical view about the nature of Christ, but they weren't Muslim. Certainly there were many Christian communities in Arabia, and none of these people, prior to their conversion to Christ, were violently attacked and taken over by Christian warriors. It was all through the loving sharing of the gospel. Now, were there mistakes? Sure. Didn't I say when we talked about Charlemagne? I think it was Charlemagne that he started out, when he came to faith. Charlemagne or Constantine? Now I'm forgetting. I should know better. But started out to advance the gospel, but did so violently. And then it was Boniface, I think it was, that corrected him and said, no, that's not how it works. And he repented of that and now moved the gospel through by sharing the gospel. Anyway, By AD 732, a century later, Christians had lost Egypt, Palestine, Syria, North Africa, Spain, most of Asia Minor, and southern France to attacking Muslims. Italy and her associated islands were under threat, and the islands would come under Muslim rule in the next century. The Christian communities of Arabia were entirely destroyed in or shortly after 633, when Jews and Christians alike were expelled from the peninsula of Saudi Arabia. Those in Persia were under severe pressure. 2/3 of the formerly Roman Christian world was now ruled by Muslims who took it all over violently. What had happened? Most people actually know the answer if pressed, though for some reason they do not usually connect the answer with the Crusades. The answer is the rise of Islam. Every one of the listed regions was taken over within the space of 100 years from Christian control by violence in the course of military campaigns deliberately designed to expand Muslim territory at the expense of Islam's neighbors. Nor did this conclude Islam's program for conquest. The attacks continued, punctuated from time to time by Christian attempts to push back. Charlemagne blocked the Muslim advance in far Western Europe in about AD 800, but Islamic forces simply shifted their focus and began to island hop across North Africa toward Italy and the French coast, attacking the Italian mainland by 837. In the 100 years between 850 and 950, Benedictine monks were driven out of ancient monasteries. Remember we talked about the monastic movement and the great advances that monasteries were making in literature and education and gardening and farming and the faith? They were run out of town. So they were driven out of their ancient monasteries, the papal states were overrun, and Muslim pirate bases were established along the coast of northern Italy and southern France, from which attacks on the deep inland were launched. Desperate to protect victimized Christians, popes became involved in the 10th and early 11th centuries in directing the defense of the territory around them. And the struggle continued unabated until the 11th century, into the 11th century. And in 1009, a mentally deranged Muslim ruler destroyed the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem and mounted major persecutions of Christians and Jews. Now, he was soon deposed, but by 1038, the Byzantines had negotiated the right to try to rebuild the structure, but other events were also making life difficult for Christians in the area, especially the displacement of Arab Muslim rulers by the Turks, who from 1055 on began to take control of the Middle East. Pilgrimages by Christians to the Holy Land became increasingly difficult and dangerous, and Western pilgrims began banding together and carrying weapons to protect themselves as they tried to make their way to Christianity's holiest sites in Palestine. Desperate, the Byzantines sent appeals to help westward, directing those appeals primarily at the person they saw as the chief Western authority, the Pope. And as we've seen, this is when Urban got the letter. But before he did, you see, the attack got the attention in the early 1070s, so 20-some years before Urban, by Pope Gregory VII. And he immediately began to make plans to lead an expedition for the Byzantines' aid, but he became enmeshed in conflict with the German emperors, with what historians call the investiture controversy that we talked about in another lesson. And Gregory was ultimately unable to offer any meaningful help. So the Byzantines persisted, and that's when Urban II, in 1095, realized Gregory VII's desire, and it turned into the First Crusade. Now, far from being unprovoked then, the Crusades actually presented the first great Western Christian counterattack against Muslims' attacks, which had taken place continuously from the inception of Islam until the 11th century. and which continued on thereafter, mostly unabated. Three of Christianity's five primary church jurisdictions, Jerusalem, Antioch, and Alexandria, had been captured in the 7th century. Both of the others, Rome and Constantinople, had been attacked in the centuries before the Crusades. The latter would be captured in 1453, leaving only one of the five, Rome, in Christian hands by 1500. That's how much influence, how much the Muslims did in attacking and taking over Christian lands. Rome was again threatened in the 16th century. Now, this is not the absence of aggravation. Rather, it is a deadly and persistent threat, and one which had to be answered by forceful defense if Christendom was to survive. The Crusades were simply one tool in the defensive options exercised by Christians. To put the question in perspective, one need only consider, as I mentioned earlier, how many times Christian forces have attacked either Mecca or Medina. And the answer, of course, is never. Myth number 2. Western Christians went on crusade because their greed led them to plunder Muslims in order to get rich. Again, not true. One version of Pope Urban II's speech at Clermont in 1095, urging French warriors to embark on what would become known as the First Crusade, does note that they might make spoil of the enemy's treasures, but this was no more than an observation of the usual way of financing war in ancient and medieval society. Crusades were expensive. Few went on crusade for riches. Of course, some probably did, and abusing others for the sake of money, but this was not the reason most went on the crusade. As one expert, Fred Gazelle, has noted, few crusaders had sufficient cash both to pay their obligations at home and to support themselves decently on a crusade. From the very beginning, financial considerations played a major role in crusade planning. The early crusaders sold off so many of their possessions to finance their expeditions that it caused widespread inflation. Although later crusades took this into account, began saving money long before they set out, the expense was still nearly prohibitive. The popes resorted to ever more desperate ploys to raise money to finance crusades, from instituting the first income tax in the early 13th century to making a series of adjustments in the way that indulgences were handled that eventually led to the abuses condemned by Martin Luther. The Pope would tell the people, if you can't go, then you can pay. And if you pay, then your time in purgatory will be lessened. That's what an indulgence, was. Poor theology, but it worked. The Pope promised that anyone going on the crusade would have their time in purgatory lessened and their sins forgiven. Again, very bad theology, but fear and guilt of spiritual punishment, or the lessening of it, was often enough motivation to gather together an army and to finance it. In short, very few people became rich by crusading, and their numbers were dwarfed by those who were bankrupt. Most medieval people were quite well aware of this and did not consider crusading a way to improve their financial situations. Myth number 3. Crusaders were a cynical lot who did not really believe their own religious propaganda. Rather, they had ulterior, materialistic motives. Now, this has been a very popular argument, at least from Voltaire onwards. It seems credible and even compelling to modern people, since we're steeped in materialistic worldviews. And certainly there were cynics and hypocrites in the Middle Ages. Beneath the obvious differences of technology and material culture, medieval people were just as human as we are and subject to the same failings, materialistic desires. However, like the first two myths, this statement is generally untrue, and demonstrably so. For one thing, the casualty rate on the Crusades was usually very high, and many, if not most, crusaders left expecting not to return. At least one military historian has estimated the casualty rate for the First Crusade at an appalling 75%. The statement of the 13th century crusader Robert of Crusades that he had come from across the sea in order to die for God in the Holy Land, which was quickly followed by his death in battle against overwhelming odds, may have been unusual in its force and swift fulfillment, but it was not an atypical attitude. It is hard to imagine a more conclusive way of proving one's dedication to a cause than sacrificing one's life for it. And a very large number of crusaders did just that. And it reminds me of the disciples. If the resurrection and all of this was baloney, they're pretty crazy to go to their death, for this lie, whatever, or that they were doing it for riches. None of them died rich. Neither did Jesus. But this claim is often revealed to be false when we consider the way in which the Crusades were preached. Crusaders were not drafted. Participation was voluntary, and participants had to be persuaded to go. The primary means of persuasion was the crusade sermon, and one might expect to find these sermons presenting crusading as profoundly appealing, and riches abound. This is generally speaking not the case. In fact, the opposite is true. Crusade sermons were filled with warnings that crusading brought poverty, suffering, and often death. That this was the reality of crusading was well known anyway. As one crusade expert, Jonathan Riley Smith, has noted, crusade preachers had to persuade their listeners to commit themselves to enterprises that would disrupt their lives, possibly impoverish and even kill or maim them, and inconvenience their families, the support of which they would need if they were to fulfill their promises. So why did the preaching work? It worked because crusading was appealing precisely because it was a known and significant hardship, and because undertaking crusade with the right motives was understood as an acceptable penance for sin. Although we know that Jesus' sacrifice paid for all of our sin, but the church, unfortunately, at that time taught differently. Far from being a materialistic enterprise, crusading was impractical in worldly terms, but valuable for one's soul. There was no space here to explore we don't have time to explore the doctrine of penance as involved in the medieval worlds, but suffice it to say that the willing acceptance of difficulty and suffering was viewed as a useful way to purify one's soul, and still is in Catholic doctrine today. Crusading was the near supreme example of such suffering, and so was ideal and very thorough-going penance. Now, related to the concept of penance is the concept of crusading as an act of selfless love, of laying down one's life for one's friends. From the very beginning, crusade charity was advanced as a reason for crusading, and this did not change throughout the period. As difficult as it may be for modern people to believe, the evidence strongly suggests that most crusaders were motivated by a desire to please God, atone for their sins, and put their lives at the service of their neighbors, understood in the Christian sense. Of course, there were abuses. I said that at the very beginning of this message. Of course, there were people with wrong motives. Of course, there were Christians who went to one city and attacked all the Jews. They didn't know what they were doing. Poor leadership. So that did happen. We get it. But that wasn't the universal approach. Lastly, myth number 4. The Crusades taught Muslims to hate and attack Christians. What we see today. It's all because of the Crusades. Now, part of this answer to this myth may be found above under myth number 1. Number 1, Muslims have been attacking Christians for more than 450 years before Pope Urban declared the First Crusade. They needed no incentive to continue doing so. But there is a more complicated answer here as well. And this is remarkable when you think about it. Up until recently, Muslims remembered the Crusades as an instance in which they had beaten back a puny Western Christian attack. An illuminating vignette is found in one of Lawrence Arabia, who was a real person, one of his letters, describing a confrontation during post-World War I negotiations between the Frenchmen, Stephen Pichon, and Faisal al-Hasmini, later Faisal the first of Iraq. Pichon presented a case for French interests in Syria going back to the Crusades, when Faisal dismissed with a cutting remark, "But, pardon me, which of us won the Crusades?" You see, it wasn't even an issue for them. This was generally representative of the Muslim attitude toward the Crusades before World War I. That is, when Muslims bothered to remember them at all, which was not often, it wasn't that they didn't think in the same way. Most of the Arabic language historical writing on the Crusades before the mid-19th century was produced by Arab Christians, not Muslims, and most of that was positive. There is no Arabic word for Crusades until that period. Earlier, and even then, the coiners of the term were again Arab Christians. It had not seemed important to Muslims to distinguish the Crusades from other conflicts between Christianity and Islam, nor had there been an immediate reaction to the Crusades among Muslims. They didn't make a big deal of it. We made a big deal of it by saying how wrong we were and violent, and that turned the tide. The first Muslim crusade history did not appear until 1899. Isn't that interesting? They never wrote about the Crusades until 1899. By that time, the Muslim world was rediscovering the Crusades, but it was rediscovering them with a twist learned from the Westerners. In the modern period, there were two main European schools of thought about the Crusades. One school, epitomized by people such as Voltaire and others, saw the Crusades as crude, greedy, aggressive barbarians who attacked civilized, peace-loving Muslims to improve their own lot. The other school, more romantic and epitomized by lesser-known figures in history, historians, saw the Crusades as a glorious episode in the long-standing struggle in which Christian chivalry had driven back Muslim hordes. At the same time, nationalism began to take root in the Muslim world. Arab nationalists borrowed the idea of a long-standing European campaign against them from the former European school of thought, missing the fact that this was a serious mischaracterization of the Crusades, and using this distorted understanding as a way to generate support for their own agendas. This remained the case until the mid-20th century, when a fellow I quoted earlier, Riley Smith, said, "A renewed and militant pan-Islamism applied the more narrow goals of the Arab nationalists to the worldwide revival of what was then called Islamic fundamentalism, and is now sometimes referred to a bit clumsily as jihadism. This led rather seamlessly to the rise of Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, offering a view of the Crusades so bizarre that it allowed bin Laden to consider all Jews to be crusaders, and the Crusades to be a permanent and continuous feature of the West's response to Islam." See, they had it all distorted, and we were the ones that taught it to them. Bin Laden's conception of history is a feverish fantasy. He is no more accurate in his view about the Crusades than he is about the supposed perfect Islamic unity which he thinks Islam enjoyed before the threatening influence of Christianity intruded. But the irony is that he and those millions of Muslims who accept his message received that message originally from their perceived enemies, the West. So it was not the Crusaders that taught Islam to attack and hate Christians. Far from it. Those activities have preceded the Crusades by a very long time and stretch back to the inception of Islam. Rather, it was the West, us, who taught Islam to hate the Crusades. The irony is amazing. So back to the present. As to whether or not we are still paying for it, see the last myth, number 4. This is the most serious misstatement of the whole passage. What we are paying for is not the First Crusade, but Western distortions of the Crusades in the 19th century, which were taught to and taken up by an insufficiently critical Muslim world. The problem with President Clinton's remarks indicate the pitfalls that await those who would attempt to explain ancient or medieval texts without adequate historical awareness. And they don't speak. Clinton and Obama don't speak for Christianity. Of course not. But we allow them to. And they illustrate very well what happens when one sets out to pick through the historical record for bits, distorted or merely selected presented, which support one's current political agenda. This sort of abuse of history has been distressingly familiar where the Crusades are concerned. But nothing is served by distorting the past for our own purposes. Or rather, a great many things may be served, but not the truth. Distortions and misrepresentations of the Crusades will not help us understand the challenge posed to the West by the militant and resurgent Islam, and failure to understand that challenge can prove deadly. Indeed, it already has. And it may take a very long time to set the record straight about the Crusades. It is long past time to begin the task. And I implore you folks, when you're having a conversation with someone, to keep these things in mind. I know I breezed through this and whatever, but try to keep, in the notes below, I'll try to at least I'll list the Crusades and the years, and I'll list just the definitions